Welcome to Law and You here on ITV. We're delighted to have you join us. I'm Uyag Mofwegwe. This is Independent Television. We're live in Benin City, Nigeria. We want to look at the issue of climate this week on the program, especially based on the effort being made by the National Assembly, in particular the House of Representatives, to ensure that this particular piece of legislation sees the light of day. In the course of the 8th Assembly, which was, of course, part of which was the House of Representatives, we understand that effort had been made to ensure that the climate bill came through. However, at that point in time, even though it had been duly passed, the President withheld assent because he said that there were clauses that became basis for him to not give assent to that bill to make it a law at that point in time. However, as of today, the 9th Assembly has been able to take a second look at some of these clauses and then address those contentious issues as far as this piece of document is concerned. However, going forward, the question is, will the President, more than ever before, find more reasons to sign this one into law? And in the final analysis, what will be the implication and what exactly are the ways in which this law will be able to help address issues around the climate? These are some of the questions to which we will be finding answers in the course of the program this week. Stay with me. My guest on the program this morning is a lawyer and someone who has passionately followed issues of the environment and, of course, climate in a number of years, and is here to share insights with us as to the dynamics embedded in this conversation. Barrister Chima Williams, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, Uye. I'm happy to be here.
Great, great. I want us to perhaps take it up from where we had left at one time. You and I talked about the environment, especially as it has to do with the Niger Delta of Nigeria, for example, but this is on a broader scale. And the world is having a global conversation about the environment. Now, the legislature in Nigeria is also making efforts in that direction. However, with all of these developments, is there any indication that we understand what exactly we're dealing with regarding climate change, for example?
Well, thank you very much. This is a topic that I'm very happy to talk about because I can claim rightly to be among those at the forefront of the exercise, you know, to bring about a climate change law in this country. First, as a civil society person, because I know that when the Climate Change Commission bill was drawn up way back in the 7th Assembly or thereabouts, you know, we were one part of those that reviewed the bill from civil society perspective, and globally, you know, we are involved in climate issues, you know, at the global stage, you know, and luckily too, the bill that we're talking about, you know, I happen to be one of the members of the Climate Change Legal Working Group. Set up by the Department of Climate Change, Ministry of Environment, you know, to review the bill, the climate change bill that Mr. President refused assent to, and then look at the reasons why Mr. President did not assent to that bill, and then see if we can correct that so that the bill can now come again under executive bill with those corrections made to enable Mr. President, you know, assent to it. But we are happy, you know, to hear and read that the House of Representatives have passed, you know, their own version of the climate change bill. However, we are not yet able to get copies of that bill, you know, to know exactly what are the contents, whether
as it stands today,
whether it addressed the questions, and whether it is in alignment with what we worked on. because the Climate Change Legal Working Group, you know, we had looked at the bill that was rejected by Mr. President,
yes,
and tried to rework it to look at the critical issues, you know, that made Mr. President withhold assent.
yes.
And since we are not yet privy to the contents, the full contents of the bill that had been passed by the House of Representatives, the only thing that we are sure of now is that it is a different version from what we worked on. Okay? Because the preview we have seen, you know, is not what we worked on. For instance, the bill that had been passed, you know, sets off a commission that is to be headed by Mr. President as chair and Vice President as a vice chair, with the 36 states governors as members and others. And one of the critical reasons why Mr. President refused assent to the 2019 version of the bill, you know, as we're made to understand, was that the bill was going to create another opportunity of creating more agencies, commissions, you know, that will necessitate government,
right,
you know, spending so much again, rather than looking inward to what we already have. How do we utilize what we have in solving our problems? You know, the issue of climate change as it relates to Nigeria, issue of adaptation and mitigation, you know, they are very expensive, okay? And we are all suffering it. So it is not to create job for the boys, again, you know, about the climate change bill. But I cannot analyze, you know, what I don't have full grasp of. But for the fact that there is already that commission that includes all these, you know, organs, except for the fact that, you know, in the analysis, we understand that a committee reviewed the 2019 version of the bill that was refused assent by Mr. President. And that committee that reviewed it included, as we are informed, okay, by the Honorable Attorney General of the Federation and the Honorable Minister for Environment. Okay, so if these, you know, offices were part of the review, okay, chances are that they would definitely have the ear of Mr. President to understand why, you know, Mr. President refused assent in the first place, and then to correct it. So, but of course, all hope is not lost, because it is only the House of Reps that have passed. The Senate will still have to do their own work on the bill before concurrence, okay, and harmonization.
Right.
So we are believing that possibly they made the Senate in their own work, and possibly at the harmonization process, what we did as a committee, okay, could equally be looked into to see how we're able to tinker with, you know, the bill to ensure that we use what we have already in-house, you know, to create the climate change, you know, platform, you know, so that one is that there will be reduction in cost of governance, which is key. We are all, you know, shouting that cost of governance in Nigeria is too expensive. So we don't want to, you know, have a climate change bill that will exacerbate that thinking the more, but rather, how can we harmonize and get the things that we have in-house to build on this, reduce cost. Of course, definitely there must be cost, but let those costs, you know, be embedded in the real action, rather than on personnel.
We should be able to tie outcomes to our spending.
Okay, so that is it. So if that was taken into account, then we are in the right
You have been a part of the conversation very significantly at several levels, civil society level, as a lawyer, when you talk about the legal framework required for all of this kind of work and the amount of action that we need to pull off in this direction as it has to do with the environment and so on and so forth. But I'd like to ask you something quickly. Look at the Niger Delta, for example. We're very familiar with many of the nasty things happening around here on account of exploration that goes on a daily basis, for instance. To what extent did your conversation, all of the collaborations that you had, all of the, if you like, all of the connections that you were able to strike on account of putting together a document that addresses all of these issues, to what extent did you put into consideration or take into consideration the issues around the Niger Delta? Look at the IOCs, for instance. Were we able to bring them into that net of conversation? Look at other stakeholders, critical stakeholders, for instance, within the oil and gas sector. To what extent are they involved going forward in this conversation? Yeah,
you see, when we are looking at issue of climate change, we don't narrow it down to any particular region because it is
a universal
phenomenon.
Right.
You know, what I call product of local action that has global consequence. Okay? Because if we want to look at the incidences of climate change, you know, the impacts in Nigeria, I mean, we can go on and on and on and cover the entire spectrum of the Nigerian Federation,
including waste management culture, for example.
Of course. Okay? And the fact that, you know, even the issue of insecurity in the country, we looked at it from the perspective of climate change impact, which is a narrative that many, you know, do not see.
Right.
The nexus between the impact of climate change and the security challenges in the country. Okay? Because when we talk of farmers' herders clashes, why are there clashes? Because the herders are trying to feed their cattle.
Yes.
And they are looking for greenery, you know, where they can do that. Because of the fact that most of the hitherto areas where they were, you know, grazing their cattle, you know, have dried up. The impact on Lake Chad Basin, you know, is an incident of climate change. Okay? So, if we look at the issue of, you know, flooding situations, erosion, gully erosion incidences, this has direct linkages with the impact of climate change. So now, coming to the key question, how did we engage these other players? I will tell you that the climate change working group, okay, which I belong to, is a conglomeration of different players, different stakeholders, okay, both professional, civil society, ministry, department and agencies, representatives, and, you know, even business people, okay? But of course, every action must start from a cluster, okay? So how will we cover issues related to operators? When it comes to issue of remediation, that is their own pool.
Yeah.
Because part of the incidences that exacerbates climate change, you know, like the release of greenhouse gas emissions, is coming from, you know, mostly gas flaring, which is a byproduct of operators in the oil and gas industry. Okay? So definitely for a bill to address climate impact, because they have a role to play. Roles are assigned to everybody, because climate change, all hands must be on deck. It is not government alone, it's not operators alone, it's not citizens alone. It is collectivity. All of us have stake, because the impact does not discriminate against the big or small, rich or poor, male or female, operator or non-operator. Its impact, you know, affects everybody. So there are processes, you know, to reach out. because, of course, we know from our experience, some of those that represent the operators may not like to sit down with civil society. I use the word may.
Yeah.
Some of them, willingly comes up because they want to have, the contrary views, whether it can affect their own perspectives.
Yes.
But some believe that they have monopoly of the knowledge, of the information, of, what they are doing. So they don't need to hear any other person. So everybody must listen to them, whether you like it or not. And it doesn't work that way for an incident that affects everybody.
Yeah.
So that is it. So there are conscious efforts to reach out to all the stratas of society that we have one role or the other to play in the climate change mitigation and adaptation processes. That's
great. Brilliant conversation so far, but we're not done just yet. I've been talking with Barrister Chima Williams, who's a lawyer and an advocate of the environment, someone who has been part of this conversation for a long, long time. We're going to push it a bit further right after this break. Stay with me. So I was going to ask you something. I mean, the world is a global village, as they say. We can't have environmental action plan, for example, in Nigeria, and not at some points or on some level find a way to create a nexus between what we have back at home and international best practice. I mean, conversations about environment are on a global scale now, even though we know at a point former US President Donald Trump had put the United States of America out of the Paris deal, and so on and so forth. Experts like yourself have talked about the impact of that action alone. But going forward, we are hoping that things will start looking up in no distant time. But is there a point of, if you like, is there a nexus at this point between what we are working on right now and what other countries are thinking? Because you now have a pool of stakeholders, including, of course, the industrialists and so on and so forth. Because at the point, there was the conversation about how that the most industrialized countries of the world should pay certain amount as tax, for example, to help those countries that are economically disadvantaged, in a manner of speaking, to be able to meet up, and so on and so forth. Are we thinking global, or we are just so, as it were, we are overwhelmed by the local issues?
Well, you see, the beauty of, an assemblage of persons, as I mentioned,
right,
draws from the fact that they were carefully selected. Okay? And of course, there is no action today, there is no law you can enact today that will be 100% homogeneous,
of course,
and totally, deriving from local circumstances without looking at the global practices. Okay? So in this, what we did in our committee was to look at some of the best, in quotes, current existing climate change laws from other climes.
Okay.
And some that have already equally been actioned on, okay, by the countries, and then we think that those can be sort of where we can pick from. Of course, there is no situation that is the same.
Of course.
Okay, so even when you are looking at what has been done outside, you must adapt it to your own local circumstances, or else it will be difficult to implement. Okay, so that is what we did. We drew from different experiences, okay, and then try to look at these experiences. How do we adapt it to our own peculiar Nigerian situation to draw up, the climate change bill that we submitted recently to the Climate Change Department of the Federal Ministry of Environment. Okay, so now, issue of, if you like, who are the greatest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions that increases the incidence of climate change? mostly in Nigeria, the operators are mostly multinationals. They are not Nigerian companies. Majority of the big polluters, okay, they are from either Europe, from America, and now Asia, you know, coming to do business in Nigeria, and then, of course, having our own local indigenous companies taking cue from them. Okay? So you cannot put a law in place that will regulate them differentially from how they will be regulated in their own home countries.
Oh, really?
Then it will become problematic.
Yes, yes.
Okay? So there will be a fusion of your local circumstance and their own, you know, situation for you to be able to bring out something that can push and drive them. So this is what we did, looking at, you know, the circumstances we have and what exists elsewhere. Of course, there is, we may not have gotten, definitely we didn't do a perfect job, because perfect laws will only be made by legislators.
Of course.
Because it is their turf. Ours is to pick the ingredients that we think should be present in a living law.
Okay.
Okay? Because when I was in school, one of my teachers, law teachers, taught us of the living law, that is the law that is applicable, and the laws in the textbooks.
Okay.
The laws in the textbooks are those laws that, you know, is enacted, but it ends up in the shelf because nobody understands the intendments or the application of such laws. So nobody uses it. Whereas the living laws are the ones that everyday usage, people applies it, people talk about it, people use it. Okay? Because it is easy to understand, it is easy to apply, and it is easy to be defended. As
we conclude now, this is one thing I must ask you. You know, when we talk about laws in Nigeria, in any sphere of our endeavor as a country, people always feel cynical because they feel ultimately government is not going to have the will or find the will to implement these laws or have a follow-through attitude towards these laws. Do you see that same phenomenon being replicated with this kind of law that we're discussing here?
Well, you see, that cynicism is out of laziness.
On the part of the public?
On the part of the public.
Okay.
Because there is nowhere in the world that government willingly, on their own, without pressure from the citizenry, does anything. Because who is government? It's me and you. So when we talk of government, it sounds as if there is external creatures that are not Nigerians. And we are all Nigerians. The president is a Nigerian, brought up in Nigeria, understands the Nigerian phenomenon, works and lives in Nigeria. Okay? So, except and until all of us mobilize ourselves, and it has happened on so many occasions, okay, that Nigerians say, well, government, you are there for us. You didn't put yourself there. You are representing us, so you must do our wish or our bidding. And then concerted efforts, through pressure, through conversations, through some legitimate legal actions, you know, we've been able to get government to do things. Even the petroleum industries bill that is being passed.
Yes.
If not for Nigerians, we won't have it. Anybody can take me on that.
Of course.
It's the pressure from Nigerians that has made even this night assembly to have made the promise that they are not going to behave like the past assemblies, that they are going to pass it. And within the time of their, you know, life, as the legislators.
As you put it right now, I think that's some ray of hope you just shared. In other words, there's light at the end of the tunnel. However, Nigerians must take responsibility for the kind of environment they want to have, the kind of infrastructure they want to see. And of course, they must be able to push governments to that level to do all that. Barrister Chuma Williams, thank you for coming to help us make sense of this conversation. We appreciate it. That's what we're leaving it on Law and You this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Muyi Agumofwegbe. Our coverage on ITV continues. Bye-bye.